At 2:13 in the morning, Cole Maddox walked out of his back door, in his socks coffee in one hand, phone in the other, and stood at the edge of his property, staring at something that made his stomach drop straight through the concrete beneath his feet. The yard was empty. 22 vehicles. Gone. Every single one. 6 months of bookings. His daughter's school tuition. The mortgage on 16 acres nobody was supposed to touch. All of it vanished before sunrise. But the woman who took it had no idea she'd just recorded every second of her own destruction. If stories like this hit different real people, real fights, impossible odds, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens next? Nobody saw coming. Cole Maddox had a rule about 4 a.m. Nothing good ever came from being awake at 4 a.m. Every significant bad thing that had happened in his adult life, the phone call about his father's heart attack. The night his marriage finally and completely fell apart, the morning the bank sent its first formal letter, all of it had announced itself in that particular window of the night when the world was too quiet and too dark for any of it to feel manageable. So when his phone buzzed against the nightstand at 4:32 in the morning, and the motion sensor app opened itself automatically to a live camera feed, Cole Maddox lay there for exactly 4 seconds staring at the ceiling before he sat up. He already knew, not specifically, not the details, but somewhere in the part of him that had spent 12 years building a business with his hands and watching that business hold together through every kind of setback that life had thrown at him, that part of him already felt the shape of what was waiting on the screen. He looked at the phone. The yard was empty. Not just quiet, just dark. Empty, the kind of empty that takes deliberate effort. The kind that requires planning and time and more than one vehicle doing the removing. Cole sat on the edge of his bed for a moment without moving. Was wearing a gray t-shirt with a small grease stain above the left pocket that he'd stopped trying to wash out 2 years ago. His feet were bare on the cold hardwood. He looked at the camera feed all 6 angles, cycling through automatically, and he watched each frame confirm the same thing the first one had already told him. 22 vehicles, all of them gone. The flatbed trailers, the service trucks, the 3 restoration project cars he had under tarps in the side bay, the heavy-duty tow units, the box van he used for parts runs. Every single working piece of equipment constituted Maddox Fleet and Restoration's ability to do business tomorrow. And the day after, and every day after that, he sat there another moment. Then he stood up, walked down the hallway, and stopped at Sophie's door. She was 8 years old, and she slept the way only children sleep completely, without reservation. One arm hanging off the side of the mattress, her hair spread across the pillow like she'd fallen into bed from a great height. Her nightlight threw a small, warm circle on the wall beside her bookshelf. Cole stood in the doorway and looked at her for about 10 seconds. Then he went downstairs, put the coffee maker on, and sat down at the kitchen table with his phone. He watched the security footage from the beginning. Maddox Fleet and Restoration sat on 16 acres of working land on the eastern edge of Callaway County, not pretty land, not the kind anyone would frame a photograph of, but functional land. Cleared, graded, drained. With a main structure Cole had rebuilt almost entirely himself over 5 years, and a yard big enough to hold 40 vehicles comfortably and still leave room to maneuver the heavy equipment. Cole had bought it at 26, when Sophie was barely 2, and her mother had already made it clear that, whatever version of their future she'd imagined, this wasn't it. He'd made the down payment with money left to him by his grandfather, signed the papers with Sophie asleep in a carrier against his chest, and driven home along a 2-lane county road with the windows down thinking, this is either the best thing I have ever done or the worst. 12 years later, the business employed 6 people full-time and another 3 on rotation. It wasn't large. It wasn't glamorous. It was a recovery and repair operation, the kind of company that got called at 2A, when a semi jackknifed on the interstate and needed pulling, or when an insurance company needed 3 totaled vehicles transported across the state by Thursday. It was honest work that required specific equipment and specific skills, and Cole had built both from nothing. The 16 acres mattered, not as an abstract investment, as a number on a balance sheet. as the actual physical space where the work happened, where the equipment lived, where his employees showed up every morning, and where Sophie occasionally did her homework on the front steps while Cole worked late in the bay. Vivienne Sterling had wanted a piece of it for the last 3 years. Sterling Development Group was not the kind of company you confused with anything small. Vivienne Sterling was 30 years old, a fact that surprised people who expected someone older when they heard the name attached to the scale of what she controlled. She had inherited a modest development portfolio from her father at 23 and had spent 7 years multiplying it into something that bore almost no resemblance to what she'd started with. Aurelia Heights, the luxury residential and commercial complex that sat directly adjacent to Cole's property, was her signature project. 400 acres of high-end construction, planned retail, and premium amenity space that had been reshaping the eastern edge of Callaway County for the past 4 years. The project was valuable. The surrounding investments that Aurelia Heights would eventually anchor were more valuable still. And there was one narrow strip of land, barely 90 feet wide. Yes, he'd intervened, running along the northern boundary of Cole's property that connected the main Aurelia Heights development to a secondary commercial corridor that Vivienne had positioned for a future expansion phase. Without that strip, the connection required a significant road detour through county land that Vivienne didn't control and couldn't realistically acquire. With it, the value proposition of the entire eastern expansion changed substantially. She had made Cole 4 offers over 3 years. The first was reasonable. The second was generous. The third was the kind number that would have made most people in Cole's position sit down and seriously reconsider their priorities. Cole had turned down all 3. The fourth offer had come 8 months ago through her legal team, accompanied by a thicker envelope of supporting documents that included property surveys, development projections, and a very carefully worded letter explaining that the ongoing nature of Cole's business operations created certain regulatory complications that Sterling Development Group might, in appropriate circumstances, be required to formally raise with county authorities. Cole had forwarded that one directly to his attorney, Audrey Fenwick, and told her to respond in whatever way she thought was legally appropriate. Audrey had responded in a way that was, by her own description, firmly worded. What followed was 6 months of complaints filed with the county zoning office about noise violations, drainage concerns, and vehicle storage ordinances, none of which had resulted in any actual findings. Each had required Cole to spend time and money responding. There had been a second round of legal correspondence. There had been 2 separate instances. Sterling Development vehicles had been parked across Cole's surface entrance under circumstances that were difficult to prove were intentional. And then 8 days ago, a county letterhead document had arrived at Cole's gate attached to the access panel, citing an emergency vehicle abatement order and referencing a case number, an authorizing official, and a compliance deadline. Cole had pulled it off the gate, photographed it, sent the photograph to Audrey, and gone back to work. He hadn't heard back from Audrey yet about the document. He was about to find out why that was worth paying attention to. The security footage ran 1 hour and 47 minutes from first movement to final vehicle. Cole watched all of it at his kitchen table with his coffee going cold beside him. The first tow truck appeared at 9 a.m., not from the county road, but from the Aurelia Heights service entrance on the northern boundary, which meant whoever had come in had either come through the development's own access route or had known exactly where Cole's boundary fencing had a maintenance gap near the drainage culvert. By 2:13, there were 6 tow trucks inside the yard, all of them operating without lights except for small work LEDs that barely lit the ground in front of them. They moved efficiently. Someone had done reconnaissance. They knew which vehicles were locked to which anchors. They had equipment suited to each type of load, and they worked without any of the hesitation you'd see from people who weren't sure what they were doing. The most important thing, the thing that Cole watched 3 times to make sure he was seeing it correctly, was the woman standing near the main gate with a clipboard. She was dressed in a dark jacket, and her hair was pulled back, and she was clearly directing the operation because twice Cole watched her walk over to one of the truck operators and point and say something, and twice the operator changed what he was doing based on whatever she'd said. Cole didn't need to zoom in to recognize her. He'd been looking at Vivienne Sterling across negotiating tables and legal correspondence headers for 3 years. He knew the posture. He knew the way she moved, like someone who was accustomed to having people organize themselves around her presence. At one point, a fourth camera caught her in a better angle, closer to the yard's interior floodlight that Cole kept on a timer. She was speaking to someone off-frame, another person Cole couldn't identify, and though there was no audio on that particular angle, the camera near the main service door was audio-enabled. Cole switched to that feed, static, wind, the low diesel rumble of tow trucks, and then clear enough to hear, without any adjustment. By the time he gets a lawyer on the phone, the property transfer will already be in motion. This is already over. Cole played it again. Then he set his phone face down on the table and looked at the kitchen wall for a moment. He was not a man who was easy to read when he was angry. Sophie had once told her teacher that her dad's face didn't change much, which had alarmed the teacher enough to mention it during a conference, and Cole had explained that he'd simply never been the type to wear every reaction on the surface. It wasn't distance. It was processing speed. He went inward first, and whatever came out afterward was usually more useful than whatever would have come out immediately. What was happening inside him right now was something specific and focused and cold. He picked the phone back up and called Audrey Fenwick. Audrey answered on the third ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant something had already reached her. Her voice was careful in the particular way it got when she was managing information in a specific sequence. I was going to call you at 6. I didn't want to wake Sophie. The yard's empty, Cole said. A pause. All of them? All 22. Another pause, slightly longer. Okay, I need you to listen to me. That abatement order, I pulled the case number this morning. It doesn't exist. There is no case. The number is fabricated. The authorizing official listed on the document doesn't hold that title in this county. Someone created a document that looks like a county order and is not one. Cole was quiet. The vehicles were removed under a document that has no legal authority, Audrey continued. Whoever executed that removal and whoever directed it committed multiple criminal acts on your property tonight. But here's what I need to know right now. How did they get in? Gate wasn't forced, Cole said. I already checked the footage. Someone used a key, a long pause, the emergency access key. There's only one copy that's supposed to be outside this property. Audrey made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then, Sterling Development's Homeowners Association claimed they returned that key 18 months ago. Their attorney sent written confirmation. Someone used it tonight. Send me everything you have. All the footage. Right now. Before you do anything else. Cole, send it to me and back it up in 3 places. I need you to be deliberate about this because what you have right now is evidence, and I need it protected. Already sent, Cole said. And Audrey, I've got audio. On the South Service camera. You can hear her. A third pause, this one different in character. More alert. Hear her say what exactly? Cole repeated what he'd heard word for word. Audrey was quiet for a moment. Then she said something under her breath that Cole didn't catch. Don't contact Vivienne Sterling directly. Don't contact anyone at Sterling Development. I don't want a single word going their direction from you that isn't through me. Are we clear? We're clear. I'll be there by 7. Keep Sophie's morning as normal as you can. Kids pick up on things. Cole looked at the ceiling. Yeah, I know. Sophie came downstairs at 6:55, already dressed, with her backpack halfway zipped and her hair in the approximate vicinity of a ponytail. She was at an age where she could mostly manage her own mornings, but still needed someone to check whether the backpack actually contained her homework, which it sometimes did not. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her father standing at the kitchen counter. You look weird, she said. Good morning, Cole said. I mean, your face looks... She tilted her head slightly, like when the Hargrove account didn't pay. Cole reached over and handed her the lunch bag. Eat your breakfast first. Is something wrong with the yard? He had considered how to handle this. For long, there hadn't been time for long, but enough to land on an approach. He was not going to lie to his daughter. He also was not going to put a burden on an 8-year-old that wasn't hers to carry. We had a situation overnight, he said. I've got Audrey coming over. It's being handled. Sophie studied him with the particular evaluative attention of a child who had spent 8 years reading her parents' expressions. How big a situation? Big enough to deal with. Small enough to deal with. She considered this. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "'Kay," she said simply, and reached for her toast. Cole sat down across from her and watched her eat and thought about the empty yard outside and about the audio he'd pulled from the South Service camera and about Vivienne Sterling standing in his yard at 2A with a clipboard and the confidence of someone who believed that money was the same thing as being right. He thought about what by the time he gets a lawyer on the phone, the property transfer will already be in motion, actually meant when you followed it all the way to the end. Yes, he thought about the email notification that had come in while he was watching the footage, a message from a Sterling development address that he hadn't opened yet, sent at 347A, with a subject line that read, "Property at 4410 Maddox Road, formal notice of vehicle abatement and subsequent action." He would open it when Audrey arrived. He had a feeling it would be useful. Audrey Fenwick was 51 years old and had been practicing property and civil litigation law in Callaway County for 23 years. She was not flashy. She drove a 12-year-old sedan and kept her office in a 2-story building on the county courthouse square that she shared with a title company and a tax preparation service. She was the kind of attorney who remembered everything, prepared for everything, and delivered very bad news in a tone of voice that somehow made it sound like the beginning of a plan rather than the end of one. She arrived at 7:08, 2 minutes after Sophie's school bus had pulled away from the end of the drive. Cole met her at the gate that showed no sign of forced entry, that had been opened and closed cleanly by whoever had used the emergency key, and walked her into the kitchen, where he'd spread his phone, a printed copy of the footage timestamps, and the original abatement document across the table. Audrey set her bag down at the spread and said, "Show me the email first." Cole handed her his phone. She read it standing up. He watched her face, which, like his, didn't give much away, but which he'd learned to read over 4 years of working together. Was a particular quality of stillness she got when something surprised her, a kind of recalibration that lasted about 3 seconds before the practical part of her brain took over. He watched her recalibrate. She confirmed it in writing, Audrey said. A question. Full email. Her name in the sender field. Her signature at the bottom. She personally authorized the removal of all 22 vehicles, cites the abatement order by number, and notes that the action was taken on behalf of Sterling Development Group. Audrey set the phone down carefully. "Cole," she said in a tone he recognized. "She just handed us everything." "I know." She confirmed the vehicles, the authorization, and the connection to Sterling Development in a single document, sent voluntarily. At 3:47 in the morning, Audrey pulled out a chair and sat down. She thought you would panic. She thought you'd call a general legal hotline at 6A and spend 3 weeks trying to figure out if the abatement order was real before anyone told you what your actual options were. About the cameras. She didn't know about the cameras, Audrey agreed, and she certainly didn't think you'd already pulled the audio. She tapped the table once with 2 fingers. "Okay, here's where we are. You have footage of the unauthorized entry. You have footage of Vivienne Sterling directing the operation on your private property. You have audio of her making a statement about the property transfer. You have a fabricated government document used to justify the removal. You have an email from her, personally confirming her role. And you have a key that her organization certified was returned 18 months ago, being used to access your gate." "Yes," Cole said. "And 22 vehicles that are now somewhere that isn't here." Audrey looked at the table. Then she looked up. She wanted this to be over before you understood what happened. She wanted you scrambling, dealing with the insurance calls, the bank, the employee questions, the operational shutdown, while her people moved on the land. She paused. "Here's what I need you to understand, Cole. Right now this morning, before she makes her next move, you have more leverage than you have ever had in this dispute. Leverage has a clock on it. If she reaches her people in the county assessor's office, or if she starts moving on whatever transfer mechanism she's been preparing. What do I need to do?" Cole said. Audrey opened her bag and pulled out a legal pad. First, she said, "We find the vehicles." Audrey made 6 calls in the next 90 minutes from Cole's kitchen table. Cole made one. His went to Bennett Shaw. ran an independent recovery operation. Out of a yard 40 minutes, west of Callaway County, a legitimate licensed, fully insured towing and recovery company that Cole had worked alongside on 4 or 5 large commercial jobs over the years. He was 63 and talked slowly but moved quickly and had a sense of how property and possession disputes worked that came from having been dragged into the legal edge of them more than once in his own career. Cole laid out the situation in 8 minutes. Bennett was quiet for a moment after Cole finished. Then he said, "You're telling me someone towed 22 commercial vehicles off private property in the middle of the night using a fake county order and a stolen key, a key they claimed they'd returned. And you've got the whole thing on camera, 6 angles and audio." Another pause. "And now you want me to—" "I want you to be available," Cole said, "with enough licensed trucks for a significant job. If I call you in the next few hours, I need you to be able to move." "What kind of significant job?" "I'll know more in about 3 hours." Was quiet for 5 seconds. "Then my crew can be staged and ready by 11. You call me, we roll." "Thank you, Bennett." Cole, a pause. "This woman, the one from the development. Sterling. She think you're going to sit down and take it?" Cole looked at the empty yard through the kitchen window. The morning light was coming across it now, pale and flat, and the space where his equipment should have been was the particular kind of wrong that settled into you the more you looked at it. "She thought I'd be too busy putting out fires to notice I was in one," Cole said. Bennett made a sound of understanding that had a certain quality of readiness to it. "I'll have the truck staged." Cole set the phone down. Across the table, Audrey looked up from her legal pad. "No, Bennett's ready," Cole said. Audrey nodded slowly, then returned to her notes. Outside, the empty yard waited in the morning light. Not for much longer. Audrey's 6th call ran long 22 minutes, most of it Hearst listening rather than talking, which Cole had learned meant the information coming back was complicated. He refilled his coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and looked at the empty yard again. He'd been doing that more than was useful, but he couldn't seem to stop. The Epson's 40 tons of work equipment that kept pulling his eyes back to the space where it should have been. His brain was still trying to reconcile the image with the one it had stored for 12 years. Audrey hung up and set her phone on the table. "The vehicles are in a warehouse," she said. "Industrial storage facility off Route 9, about 14 miles east. It's registered to a towing contractor called Hartwell Recovery Services." She paused. "Hartwell has a county contract, which is almost certainly how the abatement document was made to look legitimate. Same contractor, real letterhead, for the towing company, fabricated authorization from the county itself. Can we get them back? We can, but not in the next hour and not without going through proper legal channels, because if we send anyone to that facility right now without documentation, Hartwell will call it an attempted theft and we lose the high ground." She tapped her pen against the legal pad. "I've already filed an emergency motion with the county court. I've also contacted the county assessor's office directly and put a formal hold notification on any transfer activity related to your parcel. And I've sent a preservation letter to Sterling Development Group's attorney of record." Cole sat down. "A preservation letter. It means they can't destroy documents. It means if anyone at Sterling Development shreds anything in the next 72 hours, that act itself becomes evidence." Audrey's expression was measured the way it got when she was laying out a plan she'd already stress-tested in her head. "I need you to understand where we are strategically." Vivienne Sterling made 3 assumptions this morning. First, that the fake county order would delay any legal challenge by weeks because you'd have to first establish it was fake. Second, that without your equipment, you'd be in financial distress within days and vulnerable to a lowball acquisition offer. Third, that by the time anyone with authority actually reviewed what happened, the narrative would already be established that you were a difficult property owner who'd been in regulatory trouble, and that Sterling Development had simply acted on legitimate county authority. All 3 of those are wrong now. All 3 are wrong, Audrey confirmed. "You have the footage. You have her email. You have the audio. I've already put county authorities on notice before she could reach anyone in that office first." She leaned back. "But here's the thing I need you to think carefully about. She doesn't know any of this yet. As far as Vivienne Sterling knows this morning, you woke up at 4:30 to an empty yard, and you are currently doing exactly what she expected you to do, scrambling. Cole looked at her. Audrey held his gaze. She is going to make another move. Probably today, probably before noon. Because this is the window she planned for. Your business is crippled, you're in crisis mode, and she has momentum. She paused. When she makes that move, I want her to make it believing you're still in the position she put you in this morning. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. You want her to walk into something, Cole said. I want her to walk into the situation she already created, Audrey said carefully. I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm suggesting that we let her next decision be entirely her own, made with incomplete information, and that we be ready for it. Cole thought about this. He thought about Sophie on the school bus right now, sitting in a window seat, probably reading, unaware that the yard she'd grown up around was empty and that the woman responsible for emptying it was probably already on the phone with someone planning her next step. What are we expecting her to do? He asked. Audrey's expression shifted slightly. Just slightly. She's going to come to the property, she said. I think she's going to come here herself. Cole was quiet. She's 30 years old. She's been doing this for 7 years, and it has worked, Audrey continued. Every time. She identifies the obstacle. She applies enough pressure in enough directions, and the obstacle moves. She has never had someone turn her offer down 4 times, hold the line through 6 months of regulatory harassment, and then have her own operation documented by their own security cameras in the middle of the night. She folded her hands on the table. She is not going to hand this off to her lawyers and wait. That's not who she is. She's going to want to look you in the eye and close it. Cole stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window again. The yard was still empty. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the gate, the same gate that had been opened with a key that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. All right, he said. Then let's be ready. The call to Bennett Shaw went out at 9:47 in the morning. Cole kept it short. Stage your trucks at the County Road junction off Maddox Road. Be there by 11. Don't come in until I call you. How many you expecting to need? Bennett asked. Potentially a lot. A brief pause. I'll bring 8. That enough? Cole did the rough math. Should be. He hung up and went to check that every camera on the property was recording and that the storage was backing up to the cloud account Audrey had set up 18 months ago after the first round of regulatory complaints. It was. All 6 feeds, clean and continuous. Then he walked the perimeter of the yard slowly, the way he did sometimes when he needed to think without sitting still. The morning had warmed up some. It was late enough. Now that the flat, pale light of early hours had settled into something more ordinary, the kind of late morning light that didn't care what was happening beneath it. His boots went across the empty concrete apron, where the flatbeds usually sat, past the side bay where the tarp anchors still had their tie-downs hanging loose, past the drainage channel along the north fence where the culvert ran under toward Aurelia Heights boundary. He stopped at the north fence and looked across at the development. From this angle, you could see the roofline of the Aurelia Heights Welcome Center, the clean white signage, the landscaping that looked like it had been placed rather than grown. Somewhere on the other side of that fencing, connected to that brand, was the woman who had stood in his yard at 2 in the morning telling someone that it was already over. Cole stood at the fence for a while. Then he walked back to the gate, checked the latch, and went inside to wait. He didn't have to wait long. At 10:41 in the morning, a black luxury SUV turned off the county road and stopped at Cole's gate. 2 more vehicles pulled in behind it, a second SUV and a large pickup with Sterling Development livery on the side panels. Cole was standing by the workshop door when they arrived. He watched from there as the gate intercom buzzed. He walked over and pressed the speaker button. Maddox. Brief pause. Vivienne Sterling's voice came through the intercom. It had the quality that Cole had noticed across every interaction they'd had, smooth without being warm. Calibrated, like someone who had practiced the exact amount of certainty to put into each sentence. Mr. Maddox, I'd like to speak with you directly. There's a resolution available here that I think you'll want to hear. Cole looked at the intercom for a moment. The gate's open, he said. Come in. He released the latch. What came through the gate over the next 4 minutes was not 3 vehicles. Cole stood in the center of his yard and counted as they pulled in, one after another, using the wide entrance lane that his flatbeds normally occupied. SUVs, maintenance pickups, landscaping trucks, technical vans, 3 more executive vehicles, a second wave of development SUVs. He counted under his breath, keeping his expression neutral, his hands in his jacket pockets. Yes, he'd intervened. By the time the last vehicle cleared the gate, there were 29 of them parked across his yard. Vivienne stepped out of the first SUV. She was dressed the way she always dressed, put together in a way that communicated that she had never once in her adult life been caught off guard. Dark blazer, dark slacks, her hair back and smooth. She had 2 people with her immediately, both in Sterling development jackets, and several more getting out of the surrounding vehicles. She walked toward Cole across the concrete apron of his own yard, with the specific posture someone arriving to conclude something, not negotiate it. Mr. Maddox. She stopped about 8 feet away. I appreciate you letting us in. I heard you had a resolution to offer, Cole said. I do. She looked around the yard briefly at the emptiness of it, the bare concrete, the hanging tarp anchors, and something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The way a chess player's expression shifts when they believe they can see the remaining moves. This morning was disruptive. That was an unfortunate necessity of the abatement process. What I want you to understand is that the regulatory situation with this property is not going to improve on its own. We can continue down this road, which is going to be expensive and time-consuming for everyone, or we can reach an agreement today that makes this manageable for you. What kind of agreement? Cole asked. The same one I've been offering for 3 years, adjusted for current circumstances. She said it without apology. The strip along your northern boundary. We want 90 feet of it. You retain the remaining property and full operational capacity on everything south of the adjusted line. I'll add a relocation assistance package to the original offer, enough to cover any business disruption you've experienced this week. Cole looked at her. Business disruption, he repeated. I understand this morning. Wasn't ideal, Vivienne said, and her tone had the careful quality of someone who is choosing each word with awareness that it might be repeated somewhere later. We are where we are. The question now is whether you want to resolve this in a way that works for you or continue dealing with the regulatory and legal complications that are going to keep coming. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to need you and your people to leave my property. Vivienne's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. Excuse me? I'm asking you to remove your vehicles and your people from my private property, Cole said. He said it the same way he'd said everything else, level, without heat, without any of the anger that was somewhere inside him. Right now, all of you. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. The 2 people beside her exchanged a glance that Cole caught but didn't acknowledge. Mr. Maddox, she said, I don't think you fully understand the position you're in this morning. I'd like you to leave, Cole said. I'm asking once more before I move to the next step. The next step. She said it with something that might have been amusement, or might have been something harder than that. Operational equipment on this property. Leverage in this conversation. What you have is a regulatory situation that I am offering to resolve for you right now, in your favor. And instead of taking that, Cole said. Vivienne stopped. No, he said again. I'm not selling you the strip. I'm not selling you any of it. And I need you to take your 29 vehicles and your people and leave this property before I make call. A long silence fell over the yard. One of the people beside Vivienne started to say something and praised Deucin slightly, and the person stopped. She looked at Cole with the specific expression of someone recalculating. Rattled, not yet, but something had shifted in the structure of the conversation, and Cole could see her recognizing it without knowing exactly what it meant. You're making a mistake, she said. I've heard that, Cole said. Multiple times over the last 3 years. You're still on my property. She looked around the yard once more, at the empty spaces, at the gate behind her, at the 29 vehicles belonging to her company parked across Cole Maddox's concrete apron. Then she looked back at him, and Cole could see the decision forming, the one that Audrey had predicted, the one that came from 7 years of getting obstacles to move eventually, if you just applied enough weight. Vivienne said, We're not leaving. Not until we have an agreement. Cole held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the gate. He could feel her watching him, He could hear the murmur from the people around her, the shifting of feet on concrete, the low creak of a vehicle door somewhere in the convoy. He walked at a normal pace, not fast, not slow, the way he walked across his own yard every morning because it was his yard, and always had been, and he knew every inch of the concrete beneath his boots. At the gate, he pulled out his phone. He pressed Bennett Shaw's number. Bennett picked up on the first ring. "We're ready," Cole said. "On our way," Bennett said. Cole hung up and stood at the gate. He didn't turn around yet. He looked out at the county road, at the ordinary morning light on the asphalt, at the tree line along the northern edge of his property. About 4 minutes later, headlights appeared down the road. One set of headlights, eight. 8 licensed tow trucks in a loose convoy, amber lights running, turning off the county road and pulling up along the Maddox Road shoulder, in a line that was impossible to miss from inside the yard. Cole heard the moment Vivienne Sterling saw them. Not a sound she made, but the quality of silence behind him changed. There was a murmur, then a sharper exchange of voices, then the distinctive sound of someone walking fast across concrete. Cole turned around. Vivienne was crossing the yard toward him, and for the first time that morning, she was moving without the composure that had organized every previous step she'd taken. "Is this?" she said. "Bennett Shaw," Cole said. "Licensed recovery operator. Full crew." He looked past her at the line of tow trucks visible through the open gate. "You're on private property, after being asked to leave. Twice. Your vehicles are here without authorization and will be removed." Vivienne stopped 3 feet from him, up closer than their previous conversations, across tables or through intermediaries. Her face showed something it hadn't shown before. Fear, not exactly. More like the specific expression of someone who has been running a calculation in their head and has just discovered a number they didn't account for. "You cannot tow company property," she said. "Those are Sterling development assets worth you. Have no idea what you're exposing yourself to right now." "You're on my property," Cole said simply, after being ordered to leave. "That's the only math that matters right now." She looked at the trucks, then at him, then back at the trucks. One of her security team had come up beside her, a large man in a dark jacket who looked like his function was to make spaces feel smaller, and he said something quietly near her ear. Vivienne put her hand up without looking at him. The man stopped talking. "Let's be reasonable about this," she said, and her voice had changed register slightly, not soft, recalibrated in the way Cole had heard a dozen times from people who were working out mid-conversation that the ground they thought they were standing on was not as solid as they'd believed. "Body needs to escalate this. I came here to make you a fair offer. We can still—" "Bennett," Cole said, raising his voice toward the gate. Bennett Shaw climbed down from the lead truck's cab. He was a big man, deliberate in the way he moved, with a gray beard and the kind of easy, unhurried manner that came from having done hard work in difficult situations for 40 years. He walked through the gate into the yard and stopped beside Cole. "Morning," he said, to no one in particular. "Ready when you are," Cole said. Bennett looked across the 29 vehicles parked in Cole Maddox's yard. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word more of a professional assessment, and then he turned back toward his crew and raised one hand. The first tow truck pulled through the gate. Vivienne Sterling made a sound that Cole couldn't categorize. Then she turned on her heel and started moving faster SUV as her primary vehicle, the one she'd arrived in. And that was when the second problem became apparent. 29 vehicles, pulled in one after another, had closed off the exit lane. Her convoy had blocked itself in. Cole watched her stop, watched her look at the configuration of her own vehicles, at the angles and the spacing, at the reality that the lead SUV she needed was penned in behind 2 maintenance trucks and a landscaping pickup that had come in after it. He watched her understand what had happened. Bennett's crew had already hooked the first Sterling development vehicle, a security SUV, near the northern end of the row, and the sound of the lift engaging went across the yard like a starting signal. Vivienne turned back to Cole. "Stop," she said. "No," Cole said. "Call law enforcement right now. I will have you charged with theft of company property, interfering with a business operation." "Call them," Cole said. "Please, I have been hoping someone official would show up here for the last 6 hours. Something moved across her face. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Cole could see her working, processing, calculating, looking for the angle she'd missed. One of the first things you learned about Vivienne Sterling from anyone who had dealt with her professionally was that she was rarely caught without a move. She built situations where every path available to the other person led somewhere she'd already mapped. She looked at the footage camera above the car door, then at Cole. Cole watched her look at the camera. He said nothing. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She pulled out her phone and made the call. A second Sterling development vehicle was being lifted behind her as she spoke into the phone, her back half turned, her voice controlled with the particular effort of someone managing a situation they had not expected to be managing. Cole couldn't hear what she was saying. He didn't need to. He walked back to the workshop doorway, stood there and while Bennett's crew worked steadily and efficiently through the lot. One SUV gone, then two. Then the third tow truck pulled in and took a landscaping pickup and a technical van in 2 efficient runs. Cole leaned against the workshop doorframe and watched his empty yard fill back up with activity, not his vehicles. Not yet, but something. Movement, purpose. The specific sound of a plan working the way it was supposed to work, which was a sound he hadn't been sure he'd hear this morning when he sat at the kitchen table at 4:32, watching the footage for the first time. By the time the investigator's vehicle turned off the county road and came up the drive, 8 of Vivienne Sterling's 29 vehicles had already left the property on the backs of Bennett Shaw's tow trucks, and she was standing in the middle of the yard with her arms folded and an expression that Cole recognized from across the yard as the particular expression of someone who has been confident their whole life and is now being asked to reckon with something confidence cannot fix. The investigator's name was Elliot Vance, and he stepped out of a county vehicle with the unhurried manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to take the temperature of a situation before deciding how much energy to bring to it. He looked at the yard, at the tow trucks, at Cole, at Vivienne Sterling. Then he walked toward Cole. "Mr. Maddox," he said. "That's me," Cole said. Vance looked at the active towing operation. "You want to tell me what's going on here?" "I do," Cole said. "I have documentation. Can we start with the property deed?" Vance looked at him for a moment, the evaluative look of someone calibrating. Then he said, "Let's start wherever you want to start." Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out the folder Audrey had prepared that morning, printed, organized, tabbed, and handed it to Elliot Vance. Vance opened it. Cole started at the beginning. He laid out the property deed and the county boundary records first. The original security footage timestamps. Then the fabricated abatement order, with Audrey's written analysis of the case number and the non-existent county authorization. Then the email, Vivienne's email, sent at 3:47 in the morning, confirming in her own words that she had personally authorized the removal of all 22 vehicles. The audio transcript from the South Service camera. He did not rush. He did not perform. He simply handed each document to Vance in sequence and let the documents speak with the particular authority of things that had actually happened being described by the people who had caused them to happen. Across the yard, Vivienne Sterling had moved closer. She was listening. Vance read the email twice, then he looked up at Cole. Then he looked across at Vivienne Sterling with an expression that had changed its quality in a way that was difficult to describe precisely but impossible to miss. He said, "Can you step over here?" Vivienne walked toward them. Her composure was rebuilt. Cole could see it. The way she'd collected herself in the minutes since the investigator arrived, reassembled the surface into something that looked like control. She was good at it. It was one of the more impressive things about her. Honestly, this ability to reconstruct herself quickly under pressure. "I want to be very clear," she said before Vance could speak, "what has actually happened here. Mr. Maddox's property has been the subject of ongoing regulatory concerns, and the vehicle abatement was conducted under what our organization understood to be proper county authority. The towing currently taking place is his response, which our legal team will be addressing immediately, and I would appreciate." "Did you send this email?" Vance asked. He held up his phone where Audrey had forwarded the message that morning. Vivienne looked at it, a pause. "I sent an email, yes," she said. "In the context of..."
"Did you personally authorize the removal of 22 vehicles from this property last night?"
Vance asked. Yes, the yard was quiet enough, now that Cole could hear one of Bennett's tow trucks reversing somewhere behind the row of Sterling vehicles. Vivienne looked at Vance, then at Cole, then back at Vance. I authorized an abatement action that I believed was county-sanctioned, she said. Vance wrote something on his notepad. And do you know where the vehicles that were removed from this property are currently located? For pause, slightly longer. I would need to confirm the details with the contractor, she said. Because we're going to need those vehicles returned, Vance said. Today. And I'm going to need to speak with the towing contractor who executed the entry. Something crossed Vivienne Sterling's face in that moment, a calculation happening quickly, a reconfiguration of the board, an assessment of what the next move needed to be. Cole watched it and recognized it, because he'd been doing the same thing himself since 4:32 that morning, only he'd had 6 hours of lead time, and she'd had none. She straightened slightly. Perhaps, she said carefully, there's a way to handle this that works for everyone. If Mr. Maddox were to release the vehicles currently being removed from this yard, the Sterling development vehicles, we could arrange for the prompt return of his equipment in exchange. The yard was very quiet. Vance stopped writing. Cole looked at her. Elliot Vance, who had been doing investigative work in Callaway County for 19 years and had heard a very large number of people say a very large number of things under pressure, looked at Vivienne Sterling with an expression that was professionally neutral and said, very carefully, so you do know where the vehicles are. Vivienne Sterling heard it the moment after she said it. Cole watched her hear it. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds, the morning reconfigured itself in a way that everyone standing in that yard understood, if they understood it, to different degrees, and with very different feelings about it. Bennett's crew kept working. 9 Sterling development vehicles were now gone from Cole Maddox's property. The 10th was being hooked up as Elliot Vance wrote something in his notepad, and Vivienne Sterling stood in the middle of a yard that didn't belong to her, with her convoy slowly disappearing around her, and said nothing at all. Elliot Vance for another 10 seconds after Vivienne stopped speaking, and the scratch of his pen across the notepad was the only sound in that part of the yard. Bennett's crew was working the far end of the convoy now, the mechanical clank of tow equipment carrying across the concrete, and nobody near the workshop door said anything while Vance finished what he was writing. He capped his pen and looked up. I'm going to need both of you to stay on the property while I make some calls, he said. He said it to both of them equally, in the tone of someone who was not asking. Is that understood? Yes, Cole said. Vivienne said nothing for a moment. I'd like to contact my attorney. That's your right, Vance said. Make your call. Stay on the property. He walked away toward the far end of the yard, already dialing, and Vivienne turned from watching him and looked at Cole with an expression that had finished reconstructing itself into something controlled and deliberate. Whatever had moved across her face 4 seconds after her offer about the vehicles, that brief window where she'd heard herself say the wrong thing in front of a county investigator and couldn't unsay it, that was gone now, locked behind the specific composure of someone who had enough money to make most problems eventually manageable. This is going to get complicated for you, she said quietly. You understand that. You said that 3 years ago, Cole said, about the first offer. She looked at him. That was business. This is different. How? She didn't answer that. She looked out at what remained of her convoy. 12 vehicles still sitting in his yard, the others gone. Bennett's truck still cycling in and out with the unhurried efficiency of a crew that got paid by the job, and something in her jaw tightened once and then relaxed. You're going to release those vehicles, she said. A statement, but it came out like a structure of something that wasn't fully sure of itself. Cole said. Cole. It was the first time she'd used his first name in any of their interactions. He noticed it. Think about what you're doing. Those are company assets. The legal exposure you're creating for yourself right now. Vivienne. He used her first name back, deliberately, and watched her notice it. You're on my private property, after being asked to leave. That's not complicated. That's the whole situation. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward one of the remaining SUVs, where one of her aides was standing with a phone, already out, waiting. Cole leaned back against the workshop door frame and watched the 13th vehicle get hooked up. Vance came back 11 minutes later. He had a different quality about him, now still professionally neutral, still moving at the same deliberate pace, with the particular focus of someone who had made calls and received information and was now operating with a clearer picture than he'd had before. He stopped beside Cole. "Mr. Maddox," he said, "I've spoken with the county assessor's office and with the property division. Your attorney filed a hold notification this morning." "She did," Cole said, "and I've run the abatement order case number." A pause. "It doesn't exist in county records." "No," Cole said, "it doesn't." Vance looked across the yard toward where Vivienne was standing with her aide. "The towing contractor, Hartwell Recovery Services. You said your vehicles are at their facility?" "That's what my attorney established this morning. I've got someone going out there now." He made another note. "The entry key. You said the gate wasn't forced." "The emergency access key," Cole said. "Sterling Development's homeowner association sent written confirmation 18 months ago that it had been returned." He reached into the folder and pulled out the last tab, a copy of that written confirmation, which Audrey had pulled from her files at 7 that morning and added to the packet. He handed it to Vance. Vance read it. He read it carefully, the way someone reads something when they're already thinking about the next 3 things the document connects to. "Okay," he said. He didn't say it like everything was okay. He said it the way investigators say it when they're filing information into a sequence. "I'm going to need the original security footage. All of it. The full unedited recording from last night. My attorney has it in secure storage and can transfer it to county authority within the hour," Cole said. "She's available by phone right now if you need to reach her." Vance nodded and wrote down Audrey's number when Cole gave it to him. He looked at the yard again, at the dwindling row of Sterling vehicles, at Bennett's crew moving with steady purpose, at the wide empty spaces where Cole's own equipment should have been. And he said, more quietly, "How long have you been running this operation?" 12 years, Cole said. Vance nodded slowly. He seemed to be doing the math on something. "You've employees 6 full-time, 3 on rotation. Yet?" Cole thought about that. He'd sent a message to his foreman, Ray, at 7 that morning. Ray had called back in 4 minutes, which was fast for Ray, who was not a fast-moving person by temperament, but who moved at a different speed entirely when something was actually wrong. Cole had told him to hold everybody until he had more information, and Ray had said, "Okay, yes, 'tis," and then there had been a silence on the line that was the particular silence of a man calculating his own bills and the distance between himself and the next paycheck. "Enough," Cole said. Vance seemed to register the weight behind that without needing it explained. He wrote something else and then said, "I'll be back in 20 minutes. Let anyone leave this property until I clear it." "Understood," Cole said. The investigator walked back toward his vehicle, and Cole watched him, and then looked back at the remaining Sterling convoy and then up at the sky, which was doing nothing in particular, ordinary late-morning clouds, the kind that didn't mean weather, just presence. He was tired in a specific way that wasn't about sleep, or not only about sleep. Kind of tired that came from holding a plan together over hours, from keeping everything in the right order when the instinct was to move faster or louder, or in some direction something that would feel like doing something even if it broke the sequence. He was also hungry. He hadn't eaten since the coffee at 4:30, and it was now pushing noon, and his body was beginning to register that fact with the mild indignation of a system that had been asked to run on adrenaline longer than was comfortable. He'd intervened. He went inside the workshop and found the half-eaten granola bar he'd left on the workbench yesterday and ate it standing up while watching through the open bay door. Bennett Shaw came over while Cole was finishing it. 14 out, Bennett said by way of status report. He had a way of communicating that was almost entirely without decoration facts. In the order they were needed, nothing added. Got a tight angle on the pickup cluster near your north wall. Might take 2 passes. Take what you need, Cole said. Bennett looked at the investigator's vehicle, parked near the gate. "You doing all right?" Cole considered the question seriously, rather than reflexively. "Ask me at the end of the day," he said. Bennett made a sound that was half agreement, half something else. "She's still over there with her phone?" "Yes. Making calls." Bennett said it like he'd seen this particular sequence before, which he probably had. "They always make calls. Like the calls are going to change what the property line says." Cole almost said something and then didn't. He looked at the yard instead, at the concrete and the fence line and the north boundary where the culvert ran under toward Aurelia Heights. He thought about Sophie on the school's bus this morning, and about 12 years of early mornings and equipment maintenance and the particular smell of diesel and metal that had become, without him ever consciously deciding it, the smell of his own life, working the way it was supposed to. He said, Whatever I owe you for today, I'll make it right. You staged the whole crew on short notice. Bennett looked at him sideways. You think I don't know what she was doing to you? Cole was quiet. Word gets around in this business, Bennett said simply. The fake county order, the complaints, the access issues. He shook his head once. I've got kids too. He turned back toward the yard. Let me go deal with that pickup cluster. He walked away and Cole stood in the bay door and thought about the particular way that some people showed up for things without being asked to, and never made a production of it. And he thought that he would have to find a way to tell Sophie about Bennett Shaw at some point, because that was the kind of thing worth knowing. Vivienne Sterling made 7 calls in the 40 minutes that Vance was away from the property. Cole didn't know the content of the calls, but he knew the pattern by watching her from across the yard, the posture that changed slightly with each call, the 2 she cut short, the one that ran long and ended with her standing very still for about 30 seconds after she hung up, looking at nothing in particular, and then composing herself and dialing again. Whatever the calls were telling her, they weren't telling her what she wanted to hear. By the time Vance returned, 21 of the 29 Sterling vehicles had been removed from Cole's property. The remaining 8 were bunched near the north wall, where the tight spacing made the job slower. Bennett's crew was working through them methodically. Vance came back in with another man. Cole didn't recognize county uniform, a different division, and they walked toward Vivienne rather than toward Cole. Cole watched from a distance. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he could read the shape of it. Well enough, Vance talking. The second official writing, Vivienne responding in short sentences, her attorney apparently on the phone in her hand, because she held it out twice for one of them to hear something. Then Vance walked across the yard toward Cole. Hartwell Recovery Services confirmed the vehicles are at their Route 9 facility, he said. All 22. We've got someone out there now doing a condition assessment. He paused. There's damage to at least 4 of them. Visible damage from the removal process. Cole felt something move through him at that, not rage, not the sharp, hot thing, but a harder and quieter thing. 4 of his work trucks damaged. Trucks that he'd maintained with the particular care of someone who knew exactly what it cost to replace them. I see, he said. That's going into the report, Vance said. I'd expect so. Vance looked at him steadily. Mr. Maddox, I want to be straight with you about where this is going, because you've given me a straight account and you deserve the same back. He glanced briefly toward Vivienne's position across the yard. What you have here, the fabricated order, the unauthorized entry with the key they certified returned, the written confirmation from Ms. Sterling personally, the audio recording, the property damage, this isn't a civil dispute anymore. This is a criminal matter. Multiple counts. Unauthorized entry, falsification of official documents, theft, property damage, at minimum. Cole nodded. The county attorney is going to want the full footage by end of business today, Vance continued. Attorney 20 knows. I spoke with her 20 minutes ago. She's coordinating the transfer. He paused again. I want to ask you directly. Is there anything else I should know? Anything from the past 6 months of the regulatory complaints? Anything about previous communication from Sterling Development that you have documentation of? My attorney has 18 months of documentation, Cole said. Every complaint, every piece of correspondence, every legal letter. It's organized and available, Vance wrote. She's good, he said, meaning Audrey, in the way people said it about someone who made their job easier by doing theirs correctly. Yes, Cole said. She is. The 22nd vehicle came off the property at 1:14 in the afternoon, a Sterling Development Executive SUV that had been the most deeply wedged in the North Wall cluster and had required Bennett's most experienced operator to extract without damaging Cole's fence line. The operator managed it, though it took 3 repositioning moves and more time than any of them would have preferred. When it cleared the gate, 7 remained. Vivienne Sterling had stopped making calls. She was standing near what had been the center of her convoy, and was now an increasingly bare patch of Cole's concrete. And she was watching her vehicles disappear with an expression that had moved beyond controlled, and into something that Cole couldn't fully read from across the yard. Broken, he didn't think she was capable of anything that looked like that, not outwardly. No, not with people watching. But something that was the expression of a 30-year-old woman who had built a very large thing through a very specific method and was now standing in a yard, watching the method fail in front of an investigator, a towing crew, and a man she had tried and failed to destroy before breakfast. Cole walked toward her. He didn't rush. He crossed the yard at the same pace he'd used all morning, and he stopped about 6 feet away, the same distance she'd maintained when she'd walked toward him at the beginning of this. He hadn't planned what he was going to say. He wasn't sure he was going to say anything. But she looked at him when he stopped, and whatever she was expecting, satisfaction, or anger, or some version of, "I told you so," whatever she'd braced for, she didn't seem to find it in his face, because something in her expression shifted slightly in a way that was confused. "I want to ask you something," Cole said. She waited. "The first offer," he said, 3 years ago. Before the complaints, before the legal letters, before any of this. That first offer was fair. You knew it was fair. I knew it was fair. He paused. "What made you decide that when I said no?" The response was this. Vivienne looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away up to the fard. She didn't answer. "Yes, and for a few seconds things don't stay in the way," she said finally. Her voice was quieter than it had been all day. "They move or they get moved. That's not cruelty. That's how anything gets built." "I'm a thing in the way," Cole said. She looked back at him. "You were in the way of something worth a lot of money." "So is Sophie," Cole said. "If the property goes, the business goes. If the business goes, everything her life runs on goes with it." "Yes, I was in the way. I plan to stay in the way." Vivienne was quiet. Cole looked at her for another moment. He said, "I don't want your vehicles. I never did. I want mine back, all 22, with compensation for damage. And I want every claim and complaint and legal instrument your company has filed against this property permanently withdrawn. That's it. That's the whole list." She looked at the ground briefly. "And if I agree to that, then we're done," Cole said. "You build your development. I run my business. The strip stays mine. And none of this ever needs to go further than it's already gone." A long silence. "It's already gone pretty far," she said. "It's going to go further," Cole said simply, "unless we're done." She looked at him again, that particular evaluation, the one she'd been running on him since the moment she walked through his gate that morning, looking for the angle, looking for what he actually wanted, under what he said he wanted. Cole held her gaze and didn't give her anything she wasn't already seeing, because what she was already seeing was accurate. He wanted his trucks back. He wanted his business intact. He wanted to close his gate at the end of the day and have it mean something. "I'll need to speak with my legal team," she said. Cole said, "I'm not asking for an answer in my yard." He walked away. Behind him, he heard her make another call. This one was quieter than the others. He didn't listen. He went back to the workshop door and stood in the shade and watched Bennett's crew work the last 5 vehicles, and he thought about how the day had started and where it was now, and about the 12 years between the moment he'd signed the papers, with Sophie asleep against his chest, and this particular afternoon, and he thought that there were a lot of ways a life could go. And this was not the worst of them, not by a long distance, even with 4 damaged trucks and a fabricated county order, and the particular exhaustion of a morning that had felt, at 4:32, like the beginning of losing something that couldn't be replaced. The 26th vehicle left at 1:47, the 27th at 1:53, the 28th at 2:08, after a delay when the operator discovered a slow hydraulic issue on the 3rd truck and had to swap rigs, which cost 17 minutes, and some colorful language from the operator, and a very calm response from Bennett, who told him to take the time he needed and do it right. The 29th and final Sterling development vehicle, Vivienne's own executive SUV, the one she'd arrived in that morning, the one that had led the convoy through Cole's gate, with what must have seemed at the time like the confidence of a done deal, cleared the property at 2:19 in the afternoon. Vance was standing near the gate when it went out. He made a notation. He looked at Cole. Cole nodded. Then Bennett Shaw's operator, a younger man named Darnell, who had been working with Bennett for 4 years, and who had barely said 20 words the entire operation, walked over to where Bennett was standing and said something quietly. And Bennett looked at him and then looked at Vance. "There's something's in the back seat of the last one," Bennett said. Vance walked over. The executive SUV was on the back of Darnell's truck, properly secured, and through the rear passenger window, the window that faced outward. Now that the vehicle was loaded, a leather holder was visible on the back seat. Hidden, just sitting there, the way things get left when someone exits a vehicle in a hurry. Vance looked at it through the glass. Cole stood a few feet back and watched him look at it. "We're going to need to catalog the vehicle contents," Vance said to Darnell. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said most things. "Can you hold it at the county impound facility?" "Whatever you need," Darnell said. Vance made a note. Cole didn't ask what was in the folder. It wasn't his vehicle, and it wasn't his place, and Vance didn't offer the information right there. Cole had been watching Vance's face all morning, and he knew by now what Vance's expression looked like when something was routine and what it looked like when something was worth paying attention to. This was the second expression. Whatever was in the leather folder on the back seat of Vivienne Sterling's executive SUV, Elliot Vance was going to read it very carefully at the county impound facility, and whatever he found in it was going to matter. Cole didn't know the specifics yet. He would find out. Right now at 2:24 in the afternoon, his yard was empty of Sterling development vehicles and full of late afternoon light and the smell of diesel from Bennett's departing trucks. And Vivienne Sterling was standing near the gate where she'd need to wait for the transportation her aide had arranged, because her own vehicle was currently on the back of a tow truck heading toward county impound. Vance walked over to her. Cole couldn't hear the conversation from where he stood, but he watched it. He watched Vivienne's face when Vance said things specific, the way it changed. Recalibration. That was different from the earlier ones, deeper, the kind that told you. The information was something she hadn't anticipated and couldn't immediately route around. She said something back. Vance wrote it down. Cole looked away, up at the sky again, still ordinary, still not making any particular statement about the day, and then he looked at his gate, standing open, the same gate it had always been. At 3:01 in the afternoon, his phone buzzed with a message from Audrey. 3 words, "County has everything." Cole read it twice. He put the phone in his pocket and walked across the yard to close the gate. The latch engaged with the same sound it always made, a solid, specific, metallic click that he had heard 1,000 times crossing this yard in 1,000 different moods and weathers and states of mind. Yes, he did. Today it sounded different, or maybe it sounded exactly the same, and he was hearing it differently. He stood with his hand on the gate for a moment after it closed, feeling the iron of it, warm from the afternoon's sun, and he thought that there was still a great deal to be done. Audrey had a list. Vance had a process. The county attorney had a timeline. And somewhere on Route 9, there were 22 of his vehicles that needed to come home. But the gate was closed, and nobody on the other side of it had a key that worked anymore. The leather folder from Vivienne's SUV sat in the county evidence room for 14 hours before Elliot Vance got to it properly, flagged it at the scene, cataloged it at impound, and then spent the remainder of that afternoon dealing with the procedural requirements of what had become, by official designation, a multi-count criminal investigation, which generated paperwork in volumes that bore no relationship to the elegance of the actual evidence involved. It was nearly 9 that evening, before he sat down at his desk with the folder in front of him and a cup of coffee that had been made 2 hours earlier and was no longer worth drinking. He opened the folder anyway, and the coffee stayed untouched for the next hour and 20 minutes. Was inside was not a single document, but a collection printed pages, handwritten notes on Sterling Development letterhead, a bound section of financial summaries, and a tabbed organizational structure that divided the whole thing into 3 labeled phases. The tabs were neat. Whoever had assembled this had done it carefully, the way someone assembles a document they intend to use in meetings, to explain a plan to other people who needed to understand it quickly and completely. Phase 1, regulatory pressure and business disruption. Phase 2, financial isolation and acquisition positioning. Phase 3, transfer and integration. Vance read slowly. He turned each page with the particular care of someone who understood that what they were reading was going to require them to do a significant amount of additional work in the very near future and wanted to make sure. They got the shape of it right before they started. Phase 1 was what had already happened: the 6 months of complaints to the county zoning office, the noise violation filings, the drainage concerns, the parking ordinance challenges. All of it listed, dated, with projected outcomes beside each action and notes on the expected timeline for Cole's legal and financial response. There was a line at the bottom of the Phase 1 summary that read, "Subject has demonstrated resilience. Accelerate to Phase 2 if conventional pressure insufficient by Q3." They had accelerated to Phase 2. Phase 2 was the fabricated abatement order, the nighttime removal of the vehicles, and what followed, a financial model projecting how quickly Maddox Fleet and Restoration would enter insolvency without its equipment, a timeline for insurance claim processing that accounted for deliberate delays, the document referred to as third-party coordination, and a series of acquisition steps connected to a private company called Meridian Land Holdings, LLC. Vance had not heard of Meridian Land Holdings. He wrote the name down and circled it. Phase 3 was a transfer plan, the specific legal mechanism by which Cole's property would move from his name to Meridian Land Holdings at a price the document described as reflecting assessed value under distressed conditions, which was a phrase Vance recognized as meaning a fraction of what the land was actually worth. He set the folder down after the last page, looked at his desk for a moment. He picked up cones and called his supervisor at home. Audrey Fenwick got the call from Vance at 7:14 the following morning, while she was on her second cup of coffee and had already been at her desk for 40 minutes reviewing the documentation she'd submitted to the county attorney the previous afternoon. She listened to what Vance told her without interrupting, which required some effort on her part because several points in his account were the kind that produced an immediate and strong response in anyone who had spent 23 years in property law. She held it until he finished. Then she said, "They built a company specifically to receive the acquisition. Meridian Land Holdings was registered 8 months ago," Vance said, "in a state that allows anonymous LLC registration. We're pulling the filings now, but it'll take time to get behind the registered agent." "I can help with that," Audrey said. "I know a forensic accountant who has done exactly this kind of work before. If there's a financial connection between Sterling Development and Meridian Payments, shared principles, anything, she'll find it." "Send me her name," Vance said. And Audrey, the document also references financial transfers to the towing contractor. The language is indirect, but it's there. "How much?" The figure referenced is $48,000, listed under a project expense category. Audrey wrote that down. She wrote it carefully, the specific number, because numbers had a way of becoming the most important thing in a case when everything else was being contested. And $48,000 paid to a towing contractor shortly before 22 vehicles were illegally removed from a private property was the kind of number that didn't leave much room for alternative interpretation. "Cole needs to know," she said. "Yes," Vance said. "I'd prefer it come from you." She called Cole at 7:31. He answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake for a while, which she'd expected. She told him about the folder, about the 3 phases, about Meridian Land Holdings, and the $48,000. There was a silence on the line that ran about 8 seconds. "They planned the whole thing," Cole said. "Not a question. Start to finish," Audrey said. "The complaints were Phase 1. The vehicles were Phase 2. They expected you to be in financial crisis, within 2 weeks unable to meet payroll, behind on the mortgage, probably fielding calls from the bank, and then Meridian Land Holdings was going to approach you as an interested buyer, as Sterling Development, as a private company you'd never heard of, offering a price that looked like a lifeline when you were drowning." Silence. "And I'd never have known." "You'd never have known," Audrey confirmed. Cole was quiet for a moment longer. Then he said, "How bad is it going to get for her?" Audrey considered how to answer that. Not because she didn't know, but no, because there was a range, and the range depended on things that weren't fully determined yet. "The fabricated county document alone is a criminal charge," she said. "The unauthorized entry using the key they certified returned is another. The theft and the property damage, And now conspiracy, the planning document, the financial transfer to Hartwell, the Meridian structure. Cole, this isn't someone who made an aggressive business decision that went too far. This was organized. It was planned over months. The document in that folder is essentially a written confession to conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and financial manipulation. What do I need to do today? Cole said. This was one of the things Audrey had always valued about Cole Maddox, the way his mind went to the next practical step before the weight of the previous information had fully settled. It wasn't that he didn't feel things. She'd known him long enough to know he felt them acutely. It was that he'd learned, somewhere in 12 years of running a business alone while raising a child alone, to keep the feeling and the functioning in separate lanes. Today, she said, the county has it. Vance is good. Let the process run. What I need from you is patience, and I know that's harder than anything else I could ask. The trucks come back today, Cole said. Vance confirmed the Route 9 facility releases them this morning. Go be there for that. Let me handle the rest. The vehicles came back in 2 runs, because 22 was too many for a single convoy, and the Route 9 facility needed to coordinate the release with county documentation that had to be signed in a specific order before anything moved. The first run arrived at Maddox Fleet and Restoration at 10:17 in the morning. 11 vehicles, including 3 of the heavy-duty tow units and the box van, driven by Hartwell employees under county supervision, with an expression on each of them that suggested they understood exactly what the nature of their employer's situation had become overnight. Cole stood at the gate and watched them come in. Ray was beside him. Ray was 54, had been with Cole for 9 years, and had the build and the manner of someone who had done physical work his entire life without ever making a performance of it. He'd driven in from the far side of the county when Cole called that morning, arriving 30 minutes before the vehicles did, and he'd stood at the gate and looked at the empty yard with the expression of a man who was doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with numbers. Neither of them said much while the first 11 came in. When the last one parked, Ray walked over to the box van and put his hand on the side panel and looked at the fresh gouge along the rear corner where it had been loaded incorrectly in the dark. He ran his thumb along the edge of the damage without saying anything. 4 of them have damage, Cole said. Varying degrees. Ray nodded. I can see this one. He stepped back and looked at the panel from a slightly different angle. Not cheap. He paused. The others bad? 2 are worse than this. One's about the same. Ray nodded again, still looking at the van. What I kept thinking about this morning? He said. Cole said. I kept thinking about when you hired me. You remember what the yard looked like then? Cole did. It had been less than half what it was now, in terms of equipment and structure. The main bay had a roof that leaked in 2 places. The perimeter fence was chain link held up by optimism. I remember, Cole said. You told me you were going to build it into something worth working for, Ray said. I thought you were full of it, honestly. You were 31 years old, and you had a 3-year-old and a yard that needed a lot of work. He finally looked away from the van. You weren't full of it, though. Cole didn't say anything to that. I'm just saying, Ray said. We're going to fix the trucks, and the yard's still here. He turned back toward the incoming second run, which was visible now turning off the county road. Headlights of the second convoy appearing in the late morning light. Let's get the rest of them in. The second run arrived at 11:44 and brought the remaining 11 vehicles, including the 3 Restoration Project cars, which emerged from their transport carriers still under their tarps miraculously. Whoever had removed them in the dark had left the tarps in place, possibly because they weren't sure what was under them and didn't want to take the time to investigate. Cole pulled back the tarp on the closest one after it was parked, a 1969 Chevelle he'd been working on for a client for 8 months, and checked the body panels for contact damage with his hands as much as his eyes, running his palm along the quarter panel, the roof, the door seam. Was fine, or close enough to find that the difference was manageable. He let out a breath he'd been holding since he pulled the tarp back and put his hand flat on the Chevelle's roof for a moment, feeling the cold metal, and then he replaced the tarp and went back to counting. All 22 accounted for, home. He called Audrey at noon. They're all in, he said. Good, she said. Cole, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it calmly. He sat down on the workshop steps. Tell me. Vivienne Sterling's attorney contacted the county attorney this morning. Her position, officially, is that the abatement action was taken in good faith based on documentation her organization believed was legitimate county authority, and that she was misled by the towing contractor regarding the validity of the order. Cole was quiet. She's trying to put the document between herself and the action, Audrey said. She's saying Hartwell Recovery told her the order was real and she relied on that representation. The email, Cole said. She sent the email herself. She personally authorized it. I know, and Vance knows. And the county attorney knows. But her attorney's job is to build a structure, however fragile, and that's the structure they're building. Audrey paused. It won't hold. The planning document in that folder lists the fabricated order as a Sterling Development internal action. It's in phase 2, under their control with their handwriting all over it. She can't distance herself from a plan she wrote. But her attorney is doing the job he's paid to do, and I want you to know it's happening so you're not blindsided. She's going to fight it, Cole said. She's going to try to manage it, Audrey said, which is different from fighting it, and in some ways harder to watch, because it's slower. But Cole, the Meridian connection, is going to be the thing that closes all the exits. Once the forensic accountant traces the financial relationship between Sterling Development and that LLCC, there is no version of events where this looks like a good faith mistake. Cole looked out at the yard from the workshop steps. His trucks were back, all 22 of them, imperfect and scarred and his. Ray was walking the road doing his own condition assessment, stopping at each vehicle, writing in a small notebook he kept in his back pocket. How long does this take? Cole said. All of it. The investigation, the charges, whatever comes next. Months, Audrey said. Maybe longer. I won't lie to you about that. The criminal process moves at its own speed, and there's almost nothing we can do to change that. She paused. The civil side, your compensation for the damage, the withdrawal of the regulatory filings, the permanent injunction against any further interference with your property that we can push on. Filing the civil complaint this afternoon, Sterling Development's insurance carrier is going to want to settle that faster than their principals would prefer because the liability exposure is significant and the evidence is overwhelming. Okay, Cole said. Go home, Audrey said. Be there when Sophie gets off the bus. He almost said something about all the work still in front of them, the documentation to review, the statements still being coordinated. Then he stopped and recognized that Audrey was right, and that recognizing when someone else was right was one of the more useful skills he'd developed in his 30s. He said, Okay. Sophie got off the bus at 3:22 and walked up the drive in the particular way she walked when she was thinking about something not slow, but with a slight inward quality, looking at the ground every few steps. She had her backpack on one shoulder and her lunch bag swinging in her right hand, and she was almost to the gate before she looked up and stopped. She looked at the yard. Her face went through 3 or 4 things in about 2 seconds, the confusion, the recognition, the relief, and then she looked at Cole, who was leaning against the gate post, and she said, They're back. They're back, Cole said. She looked at the row of trucks again. Ray and another crew member were at the far end of the yard doing maintenance checks. The sound of their work, the specific ordinary sounds of tools and engines, and the kind of work that happened here every day was carrying across the yard in the late afternoon air. All of them? Sophie asked. All 22, Cole said. She was quiet for a moment, still looking. Then she said, 4 of them have marks on them. She said it with the matter-of-fact precision of someone who had grown up around this yard and knew the equipment the way other kids knew their classmates' faces. They do, Cole said. We're going to fix them. She looked at him then, the full evaluation she had been doing since she was about 5, and he'd stopped being able to hide the shape of things from her. Are we okay? She said. We're okay, he said. She studied him for another moment. Then she said, okay, with the particular weight of a child who has decided to trust the answer, and walked through the gate into the yard. Cole watched her go. She stopped beside one of the restored flatbeds, one of the undamaged ones, and put her hand on the side panel the same way Ray had done with the box van, and then she kept walking toward the workshop. Toned, she'd apparently decided to do her homework, which she sometimes did when she wanted to be near the work without being in the middle of it. Cole stood at the gate for a moment longer. Then he went inside. The emergency meeting happened 4 days later. Vivienne's team called it not Sterling Development officially, but a communication from her director of operations to a list of executives, investors, development partners, and 3 community representatives who had financial relationships with the Aurelia Heights project. The location was the Aurelia Heights Welcome Center, the same clean-lined building, visible from Cole's north fence, with its white signage and its landscaping that looked chosen rather than grown. Audrey had been notified through the county attorney's office that the meeting was happening, which meant Vance had found out somehow and had thought Audrey should know, which meant the meeting had come to official attention through. Vivienne probably hadn't intended. Audrey told Cole the evening before. She's going to frame the narrative, Audrey said. They were in Cole's kitchen, the same table where 4 days ago she'd laid out her legal pad, and the investigation had been a set of possibilities rather than a documented reality. She's going to present her version of what happened to the people who have money in this project and who are now very concerned about what the criminal investigation means for their investments. You think I should be there, Cole said. I think the people in that room deserve to hear what actually happened, Audrey said. And I think Vivienne Sterling, standing in that room surrounded by people who are about to make decisions about her future, should have to look at the person she decided to destroy when he walks through the door. Cole looked at the table. You've been waiting to say that, he said. I've been waiting to say that for 2 days, Audrey agreed without apology. He thought about it. He thought about Sophie upstairs doing her homework, and about Ray's notebook full of condition assessments, and about the 4 damaged trucks still waiting in the side bay. He thought about standing at the gate at 4:32 in the morning, looking at an empty yard, and the particular cold feeling of understanding that someone had decided, deliberately, his life was an obstacle to be removed. All right, he said. I'll be there. The Welcome Center was set up with a long oval table and about 30 chairs, most of them occupied when Cole and Audrey arrived. Cole had worn the clothes he wore to county permit meetings, not dressed up, but not the work clothes either. A clean dark shirt and pants that said, I am here on purpose. Audrey wore what she always wore to professional settings, which was everything in order and nothing performative. They came in through the main entrance, and the room noticed them. Loudly, but there was a particular shift of a room that has been configured around one narrative and has suddenly registered the presence of someone who belongs to a different one. Vivienne was standing at the far end of the table. She saw Cole in the first second, and her expression didn't change, which told him she'd been told he might come and had prepared for it. So 2 of her senior executives were beside her. Her attorney was in a chair along the wall, not at the table, which meant he was present, but had been positioned as support rather than led. Cole and Audrey took seats near the door end of the table. A man Cole didn't know, one of the investment representatives, from the cut of his suit and the specific way he sat that communicated financial authority, looked from Cole to Vivienne and back to Cole with the expression of someone whose calculus was actively updating. Vivienne began. She was good at it. Cole had always known she was good at this part, the room management, the tone, the way she structured information to lead people toward conclusions without appearing to push them. She used the words regulatory complexity and contractor misrepresentation and good faith reliance in the first 4 minutes, and she used them in a sequence that built a version of events in which she was a developer who had acted on faulty information provided by a vendor and found herself in a difficult legal situation that her team was actively resolving. She did not once say Cole's name. She referred to the property as the adjacent parcel and to the abatement as the contractor executed removal action, and she presented the situation as something that had happened around her rather than something she had designed. Cole sat and listened. He did not move. He did not react. He had Ray's specific quality of stillness when he needed it, the kind that came from years of being the person who had to stay functional when something was going wrong. When she finished, the man in the expensive suit said, "What's the exposure on the criminal matter?" Vivienne's attorney started to answer from the wall. Cole said, "May I?" The room went quiet. Vivienne looked at him. Cole reached into the folder. Audrey had prepared a version of the same documentation he'd handed Vance 4 days ago. No, plus everything that had come out since, and he placed it on the table in front of him. I'm not here to argue, Cole said. He said it to the room, not to Vivienne, though he was aware of her at the end of the table in the way you're aware of a fixed point when you're navigating. I'm here because the people in this room are making decisions about a project and a person, and I think you should have the actual information. He started with the security footage, the timestamp, the 6 camera angles, the audio from the South Service camera. He did not describe it dramatically. He described it the way he'd described it to Vance in sequence, with dates and times and the specific things that were visible in each frame. Then he put Vivienne's 3:47 a.m. email on the table, a printed copy, legible, her name in the sender field, and her signature at the bottom. And he said this was sent 4 hours after the removal. She personally authorized it. A man 3 seats to his left picked up the copy and read it. Then Cole put the county attorney's confirmation on the table. The abatement order case number didn't exist. The authorizing official listed didn't hold that title. Yet, the document was fabricated. The man in the expensive suit had stopped blinking at a normal rate. Audrey slid the Meridian Land Holdings documentation. Across the table, the forensic accountant's preliminary findings, which had come in 2 days ago, and which connected a Sterling Development internal account to the LLC through 3 intermediary transactions that were, in the forensic accountant's words, structured to obscure origin. Then Cole put the 3-phase planning document on the table. He'd gotten a copy through the county attorney's disclosure process, and he placed it in the center of the table without comment and let the people nearest to it read the tabs. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. The room was completely quiet. One of Vivienne's executives, the one on her left, a man who had been in professional proximity to her for what Cole estimated was several years, picked up the planning document and read the Phase 2 summary. Then he set it down and looked at Vivienne with an expression that was not accusation, but was also not anything else that could be called supportive. The executive on her right was looking at the table. Her attorney along the wall had the expression of someone working very hard to look professionally neutral, while the situation he'd been retained to manage was becoming significantly more complicated in real time. Vivienne was looking at Cole. He met her eyes across the length of the table. He didn't hold it pointedly or let it go quickly. He just looked at her the way you look at someone when you're in the same room, and there's nothing left to pretend isn't true. She looked away first. The man in the expensive suit said, "Who is Meridian Land Holdings?" Vivienne's attorney said, "That's a matter currently under investigation, and it wouldn't be appropriate." "Is it connected to Sterling Development?" the man asked. A pause. "The investigation is ongoing," the attorney said. The man looked at the financial summary page of the forensic accountant's report. He looked at it for a long time. Then he set it down and folded his hands on the table and looked at Vivienne Sterling at the far end with the expression of someone who has concluded a calculation and does not like the result. "Vivienne," he said. She looked at him. "I'm going to need to speak with the other investors before we discuss anything else today," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It had the specific tone of someone who had just said something and was informing the room of the decision. One of Vivienne's executives, the one on her left, the one who had read the planning document, stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood, collected the copies in front of him, and walked to a different part of the room, away from the end where Vivienne was standing. The man on her right stayed seated but said nothing and did not look at her. Cole watched this. He watched all of it, not with satisfaction. Exactly. Satisfaction felt too small and too clean for what he was actually feeling, which was more complicated and less comfortable than that. But with the particular awareness of someone who has spent 4 days watching a plan hold together under pressure and has just seen the final piece set correctly into place. Vivienne Sterling stood at the end of the table in the welcome center of the development she had built and looked at the people around it and found, for perhaps the first time in 7 years of making things move the way she wanted them to move, nobody in the room was going to do what she needed them to do next. Her executives, not her investors, not her attorney, who was making notes that seemed to be about his own next steps rather than hers. And certainly not Cole Maddox, who was sitting near the door end of the table in a clean dark shirt, not angry, not gloating, not performing anything for anyone in the room just present, The Setsensintiend, with the specific weight of a man who had built something real and had held onto it through a night and a morning, and 4 days that had tested every part of what he was made of. Audrey put her hand briefly on the table between them, not on his hand, just near it, a gesture that communicated that she'd seen enough and they could leave, and Cole gathered his documents and stood. He didn't say anything further to the room. He didn't need to. The documents were on the table. The people in the room had eyes and minds and their own decisions to make about what they'd just read, and those decisions were theirs to make. And Cole Maddox had never been in the business of making people do anything. He just needed them to see the truth. They had seen it. Yes, he'd intervened. He and Audrey walked out through the entrance, past the white signage and the chosen landscaping, and the clean lines of a building that had been designed to project confidence and permanence. Yes, he'd intervened, and Cole held the door for Audrey without thinking about it, and then they walked to her 12-year-old sedan in the parking lot, and she unlocked it, and they got in. She started the car. She didn't pull out right away. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, looking through the windshield at the welcome center entrance. That executive, she said. The one who stood up. Yes, Cole said. He's going to cooperate with the investigation, she said. A prediction, a statement. Yes, Cole said again. Audrey pulled out of the parking lot and onto the access road that led back toward the county road, and Cole looked through the passenger window at the tree line along the edge of the development, at the roof line of the Welcome Center shrinking in the side mirror, at the county road that would take them back past the turn for Maddox Road, and the gate and the yard that had been empty for one morning and would not be empty again. His phone buzzed. A message from Ray Box Vans Dunn. Came out better than expected. Cole looked at it for a moment. He put the phone in his pocket and watched the county road run ahead of them through the ordinary late afternoon light, and he thought that there was still between today and finished the criminal process, the civil settlement, the county proceedings, all of it moving at its own pace through its own machinery, but that the shape of it was clear now, the direction of it was set, and somewhere at the end of it, on the other side of months that would require patience, he was not always sure he had enough of. His gate would be closed, and his land would be his, and the thing Vivienne Sterling had spent 3 years trying to take would still be standing exactly where he'd put it. Ray's assessment of the box van turned out to be accurate. It came out better than expected, which was not how things usually went when you were repairing damage that someone else had caused in a hurry in the dark. The bodywork took 3 days, and the paint matching took another 2, and when it was done, Ray rolled it out of the bay and parked it in its usual spot and stood back and looked at it with the critical eye of a man who fixed things for a living and knew the difference between good enough and actually good. It was actually good. Cole walked around it once without saying anything. Then he said, "Nice work." And Ray said, which was Ray's version of thank you. They moved on to the next truck. The repairs took 3 weeks in total, because the damage was beyond what the shop could handle, but because Cole had 3 paying jobs that couldn't wait, 6 employees whose paychecks were tied to those jobs, and only so many hours in a working day. The damaged trucks got worked on in early mornings, late evenings, the specific hours that belonged to the shop's needs rather than any client's timeline. Cole did a significant portion of the work himself, not because he had to, but because he needed to. There was something in putting his hands on the trucks that had been taken and bringing them back to serviceable condition that was more necessary than he could have articulated cleanly to anyone who asked. He didn't sleep well during those 3 weeks. Not badly, he'd had bad sleep before, during the years when Sophie was small and sick regularly, and he was running the early version of the business on a thread, and this wasn't that. It was more like the kind of sleep that knows there's still unresolved weight somewhere and keeps one level of processing running even when the rest shuts down. He'd wake at 3 or 4, lie still for a while, then get up and make coffee and sit at the kitchen table in the dark. Sometimes he looked at the security feeds. Not obsessively, he'd check them once, confirm the yard was as it should be, and close the app. He'd check them. He wasn't going to pretend he didn't. The investigation moved at the pace Audrey had warned him about, which was a pace that felt, from the suit side, like barely moving at all. Vance called every week or so with updates that were factually specific and emotionally unrevealing, which was exactly the right way to conduct an ongoing investigation and also exactly the right way to drive a civilian absolutely out of his mind with waiting. Cole took the calls and thanked Vance and relayed the relevant parts to Audrey, who would then translate the investigative language into what it actually meant for Cole's situation, which was her particular skill and the reason he'd hired her in the first place. The forensic accountant, a woman named Patricia Ossie, who had been doing exactly this kind of financial tracing work for 16 years and had the calm, systematic energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed finding things that had been deliberately hidden, confirmed the Meridian connection in the fourth week. Suspected. Confirmed. 3 accounts, 2 intermediary transfers, and a document that used Sterling Development's internal project code for the Aurelia Heights Eastern expansion on a payment authorization that was supposed to look like a vendor expense. Audrey called Cole on a Wednesday afternoon to tell him. Patricia found a direct financial trail from Sterling Development to Meridian Land Holdings, she said. $41,000 in 3 transfers over 6 months. The Meridian LLC was set up to receive Cole's property. The $48,000 to Hartwell was separate, but connected, same authorization chain, same project code. Cole was in the workshop when she called. He set down the wrench he'd been holding and leaned against the workbench and listened. That closes the conspiracy charge, Audrey said. You can't claim good faith reliance on a contractor's misrepresentation when your own financial records show you funded the company that was going to receive the stolen property. What happens now? Cole said. The county attorney has what they need to move forward on criminal charges. Fabrication of official documents, unauthorized entry, theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and property acquisition through illegal means. She paused. There's also the matter of the executive who cooperated. He's been talking to investigators for 2 weeks. I don't know the full content yet, but Vance did was significant. Cole thought about the man who had stood up from his chair in the Aurelia Heights Welcome Center and moved to a different part of the room. The quiet decisiveness of it. He was in on it, Cole said. Adjacent to it, Audrey said carefully. He knew more than he should have known and less than full participation. Investigators are characterizing him as a cooperating witness, which means he gets consideration for what he's providing. What's he providing? Apparently Vivienne's pattern of this goes further back than your situation, Audrey said. It was a property dispute 4 years ago. Different county, different owner. It didn't get as far as yours did. The owner sold before Phase 2 became necessary, but the structure was similar. Cole was quiet for a moment. She's done this before, he said. A version of it, Audrey said. That when it worked, she built it into a more refined process. Your situation was the most developed version of the methodology. Cole thought about that. He thought about whoever had sold 4 years ago, someone who hadn't had cameras or hadn't had Audrey or had simply been worn down by the particular grinding pressure of Phase 1 until selling felt like relief rather than defeat. Yimid. He thought about what that person's morning had looked like when they signed the papers, whether they'd known exactly what had happened to them or whether they'd simply felt the shape of it without being able to name it. Okay, he said. What do I need from you right now? Patience, she said, for what felt like the 15th time since this had started. You keep saying that, Cole said, because you keep needing to hear it, she said, not unkindly. The civil settlement came before the criminal process resolved, which was what Audrey had predicted and what Sterling Development's insurance carrier had decided was the financially rational path given the evidence. The carrier made contact through legal channels 6 weeks after the Welcome Center meeting, and what followed was 3 weeks of negotiations that Cole largely stayed out of, trusting Audrey to operate in that space with the comprehensive documentation and the particular firmness that she brought to things she'd already won on paper. Audrey called him on a Tuesday morning while he was doing the weekly maintenance check on the flatbeds. We have an offer, she said. Cole climbed down from the cab of the second flatbed. Tell me, she told him. The number was substantial, not life-changing in the way that Vivienne's original land offer had been, but genuine compensation for the vehicle damage, the operational disruption, the 3 weeks of repair costs, and a punitive component that the carrier had agreed to because the alternative was litigation that made their insured look significantly worse than settling did. Cole listened to the full breakdown. Then he said, "Does it include the regulatory withdrawal? Full withdrawal of every complaint, every zoning filing, every legal instrument filed against your property?" "In the past 18 months, Audrey said. "It also includes a permanent injunction preventing Sterling Development Group or any affiliated entity from filing regulatory actions against your property without independent third-party verification of the underlying claim." "And Meridian?" Cole said. "Meridian Land Holdings is dissolved. The filing happened yesterday. The LLC no longer exists." Cole leaned against the flatbed and looked at the yard. All 22 trucks repaired and in service. Ray was at the far end, doing his own morning walkthrough. 2 of the crew members were prepping the heavy-duty unit for a job that afternoon. The ordinary sounds of a working yard diesel, metal voices filling the space the way they were supposed to. "Audrey," he said, "is this the right answer?" A pause. "Legally and financially, yes. The civil settlement doesn't close the criminal investigation. Those charges proceed independently. You'll still have to give statements, and the county attorney's process will run its course. But the civil resolution means your business is whole and your property is legally protected before the criminal process finishes." "That's not what I asked," Cole said. Audrey was quiet for a moment. This was one of the things he valued about her. She didn't fill silences that deserved to stay open. "I think," she said finally, "that you built something with your hands, and someone tried to take it through a process that was dishonest and calculated and cruel. I think you held on to it. I think the settlement makes you financially whole and legally protected and removes every instrument she used against you. And I think the criminal process is going to continue on its own track regardless of what you decide today." She paused. "What I think you're really asking is whether accepting a settlement means you let her off the hook. And the answer to that is no. The county attorney doesn't need your civil settlement to do their job." Exhaled. "Okay," he said, "accept it." The papers were signed 11 days later. Cole sat at Audrey's office. Office table, the one in the 2-story building on the courthouse square, between the title company and the tax preparation service, and read every page before he signed it, which took 40 minutes, and which Audrey did not rush. When he got to the page that formalized the withdrawal of all regulatory actions and the permanent injunction, he read it twice. Then he signed. Audrey witnessed it. She didn't make a production of it. She dated it, added her signature, and stacked the pages neatly. "Done," she said. "Done," Cole said. He drove home along the 2-lane county road with the windows down, the same road he'd driven the day he bought the property with Sophie asleep in the carrier against his chest, and he thought about how differently a road could feel depending on what you were carrying when you drove it. The criminal charges as against Vivienne Sterling were formally filed 8 weeks after that 5 counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud, fabrication of official documents, theft, two counts related to the financial structure of the Meridian acquisition scheme. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea on her behalf at the arraignment, which was expected, and the court set a trial date that was 14 months away, which was also expected and which Vance had warned Cole about months earlier. Cole was not in the courtroom for the arraignment. He had a job that morning, a semi-truck recovery on the interstate, the kind of job that required the heavy-duty unit and 2 of his best operators and his full attention, and he did that job instead. He found out the plea had been entered from a text message from Audrey while he was driving back from the highway. He read it at a red light and then put his phone in the console and drove the rest of the way home. No. What happened to Vivienne Sterling's position within her own organization happened faster than the legal process, and in some ways was more complete. The investor, who had folded his hands at the Welcome Center meeting, organized the others within 2 weeks of that meeting. The result was a restructuring of the Aurelia Heights project's governance that moved Vivienne from decision-maker to something that had the title of strategic advisor and the actual authority of someone who was being professionally managed out of the things she'd built. The access road plan, the eastern expansion, the corridor that would have required Cole's 90-foot strip was formally abandoned in the project's revised development plan, citing changed infrastructure priorities, which was the language organizations used when they needed to reverse a direction without fully explaining why. The towing contractor, Hartwell Recovery Services, lost its county contract within a month of the investigation becoming public. The contract was put out for competitive bid and awarded to a different company. Hartwell faced its own set of charges: the operators who had entered Cole's property, the supervisory staff who had coordinated the night operation, and those proceedings moved through the system alongside the Sterling case. Cole followed it all at a distance. Not obsessively, even closely, most of the time. Audrey kept him informed of what was relevant to his situation, and Vance called when there was something he needed to know, and between those two sources he had enough information to track the shape of things without living inside the process. He had a business to run. One evening, about 3 months after the settlement was signed, Audrey came by the shop. For a meeting, she called first and said she was in the area and was wondering if she could stop, which was unusual enough that Cole had the coffee made before she arrived. She sat at the kitchen table, and he sat across from her, and for a few minutes, neither of them was in lawyer-client mode, which happened sometimes and which Cole always appreciated. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right," he said. "When Vivienne made the last offer, it's the one at the Welcome Center, when she said she'd release your vehicles if you released hers." Audrey wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "If Vance hadn't been standing there, if it had just been you and her in your yard, would you have taken that deal?" Cole thought about this seriously. He gave it the weight it deserved. He said, "Because of the legal position. Because of what it would have meant," he said. "Taking that deal would have meant she got to walk away from what she did by trading something she'd stolen in the first place. That's not a deal. That's her telling me that taking my things and giving them back is a form of negotiation." He looked at the table. "Sophie's going to be an adult someday. She's going to run into people who think that power is the same thing as being right. I don't want her to think that's how it works because she watched her father confirm it." Audrey was quiet for a moment. "That's a better answer than I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" Cole said. "Something's about the legal evidence," she said. Cole almost smiled. "That too," he said. Sophie was 9, now had turned 9 weeks after the settlement was signed, which meant her birthday had arrived during the period when Cole was still processing what the previous several months had cost him, financially, but in the specific interior currency of sustained stress and the particular exhaustion of holding a plan together over time. He'd made her the same birthday dinner he made every year her choice, which was always tacos. Had been tacos for 4 years running and showed no signs of changing, and she'd gotten a new bike and a set of art supplies she'd asked for, and a card from Ray that just said happy birthday in Ray's handwriting, which Sophie had put on her bookshelf next to the card from her grandmother. After dinner, she'd asked him to come sit on the workshop steps with her while she drew in her new sketchbook, which she sometimes did in the evenings when the weather was good, and he'd brought his coffee out and sat there while she drew, and the yard settled into the sounds it made when the day's work was done. "Dad," she said, without looking up from the sketchbook. "Yeah," Cole said. "Were you scared? When all the trucks were gone?" He thought it'd soften. He thought of whether to soften it or give her the honest answer. He'd been giving her honest answers since she was about 6, calibrated for age but not falsified. And she'd proven consistently that she could handle more truth than adults assumed children could. "Yes," he said. "Not the way I'm scared when something happens to you, but scared for the business, scared for the people who work here, scared that I'd made a mistake somewhere, and it was going to cost us things we couldn't get back." Sophie drew for a moment. "But you didn't show it," she said. "I showed it to Audrey," Cole said. "And to Ray, a little. To me. You were 8, Cole said. You had school." Sophie looked up then, and her expression was the particular expression she got when she was deciding whether an answer was sufficient or whether it required follow-up. She decided it was sufficient. "Okay," she said, and looked back down at her drawing. Cole drank his coffee. The yard was lit by the shop lights he kept on a timer, and then trucks were something, and somewhere two properties over a barking at something, and the night air had the particular quality of early autumn, cool enough to be aware of, but not cold. "What are you drawing?" Cole asked. "The yard," she said. "From this angle." He looked at the yard from their angle, the workshop steps, looking north across the concrete, the trucks in their rows, the gate at the far end, the tree line past the boundary fence. "Can I see?" She tilted the sketchbook toward him. It was rough. She was 9, not an art student, but the proportions were right, and she'd captured something, in the way the light fell across the trucks that was more observant than most adults would have managed. "That's good," he said. "The fence is wrong," she said critically, looking at her own work. "The fence looks like a fence," Cole said. "It's the wrong kind of wrong," she said, which was a distinction that made complete sense to Cole, even though he couldn't have explained it to anyone else. She went back to drawing. He went back to his coffee. The yard stayed the way it was lit, occupied, ordinary. He'd thought, in the weeks after everything settled, about what Vivienne had said in his yard during the confrontation. That things don't stay in the way. They move or they get moved. He'd turned that over enough times to understand that she wasn't entirely wrong as a description of how the world operated, how power moved through spaces, and how the people who had it used it to redirect the people who didn't. What she'd missed, what the whole three-phase plan had missed, underneath all its careful structure, was the difference between an obstacle and a foundation. Obstacle could be moved. A foundation was what the thing you were building stood on, and you didn't move a foundation without bringing down everything it held up. She'd looked at 16 acres and a fleet of trucks and a man who kept saying no, and she'd seen an obstacle. She'd never seen what it actually was, which was the material form of 12 years of a specific decision to build something that meant something, to raise a child inside a life that had weight and purpose and roots deep enough to hold. You couldn't buy that. She'd had the money to buy almost anything, and she'd learned at significant cost to herself that she couldn't buy that. The criminal trial was still 14 months away when the last of the repair invoices was paid, and the last of the county documentation was filed, and the last regulatory withdrawal was confirmed in writing and mailed to Audrey's office, where she put it in a folder marked Maddox, closed on the civil side, and set it in her filing cabinet next to 15 years of other cases. She called Cole when she filed it. "Everything's in order," she said. "The civil matter is completely resolved. The property is yours, unencumbered, with the injunction in place. Regulatory record is clean." A pause. "How are you doing?" Cole was in the yard when she called, standing near the gate, which is where he often ended up at the end of a day, in the same way that some people ended up at windows. "I'm all right," he said. And then, because Audrey had been through enough of this with him to deserve the fuller answers, "I'm tired in a way I don't think is finished yet. But the yard's running, the trucks are in good shape. Ray just told me we have the best booking month we've had in 2 years. He looked at the gate. Sophie's drawing pictures of the trucks. "That sounds right," Audrey said. "Audrey," he said. "Yes, thank you," he said. "I don't think I've said it correctly. Just for the work." For he paused, because he wasn't a man who found this particular type of sentence easy to finish. For taking it seriously, all of it. A brief silence. "Cole," she said, "you gave me better evidence than most clients give me in a career. You stayed calm when calm was the hardest available option, and you asked for only what was fair." Another pause. "That made my job significantly easier. You don't need to thank me for doing it well." He almost said something and then didn't. "Send me your invoice," he said instead. "Already in the mail," she said. He laughed. He hadn't done that in a while, and it surprised him slightly, the way it came out, genuine and a little rough. He heard Audrey make a sound on the other end of the line that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. Then she said goodbye, and he put the phone in his pocket and stood at the gate in the early evening light. The months that followed were not dramatic. They were not the kind of months that made for a compelling story. Were the months of a working yard, working jobs, booked and completed, trucks maintained and occasionally repaired, employees showing up and doing their work and going home. Ray turned 55, and the crew got him a cake that he was visibly embarrassed by and visibly pleased by, in equal measure. Cole hired a 7th full-time employee, a young woman named Carla who had come out of a heavy equipment program at the County Technical College and could handle the heavy-duty unit better than anyone Cole had trained in 5 years. Sophie started 4th grade and decided, briefly and with complete conviction, that she wanted to be a marine biologist. Cole bought her 2 books about ocean ecosystems that she read in 4 days, and then moved on to her next interest, which was architecture. Cole watched her look at buildings differently after that, the proportions, the way structures related to the land they sat on. Yes, he'd intervened. He'd come outside one morning to find her standing at the north fence looking at the Aurelia Heights roofline, with the evaluative expression she got when she was analyzing something. "What are you thinking?" he said. "The roof pitch is wrong for this region," she said. "It's designed for somewhere else." Cole looked at the roofline. He'd never thought about it in those terms, but once she said it, he could see what she meant. The aesthetic was imported, applied to the land rather than grown from it. "You might be right," he said. "The eaves are too shallow," she said, with the confidence of a 9-year-old who had been reading about architecture for 3 weeks. Then she turned away from the fence and went back inside, leaving Cole standing there looking at the roof line of a development that had, at significant effort and expense, failed to take the land it was looking at. Some intervened. There was something in that moment, something he didn't try to name while it was happening, that felt like the specific, quiet satisfaction of a thing being over. Triumphant. Not resolved into some clean lesson. Just over. In the way that hard things end when enough time and enough honest work has passed through them. The trial was still pending. Vivienne Sterling's attorney was doing what attorneys did, which was make the process as long and as complicated as the system allowed, and there would be months more of that before anything concluded. Cole had given his statement to the county attorney, and would testify when called, and would do those things the same way he'd done everything else, straightforwardly, without performance, saying what happened in the order it happened. But that was future. That was the remaining thread of a thing that had been largely resolved already in the ways that mattered most. What existed right now, this evening, was the yard and the light and the gate under his hand, and sets on somewhere inside the workshop the sound of a radio that Ray had left on. Country music drifting out through the open bay door, and upstairs in the house Sophie's light on in her room, where she was probably reading or drawing or doing homework, with the particular focused absorption of a child who knew that her world was intact and had stopped thinking about it because intact was supposed to be the ordinary condition of things. Cole stood at the gate for a while. He thought about the morning. All of this had started 4:32, the empty yard, the coffee going cold, the footage cycling through 6 camera angles, confirming the same impossible thing. He thought about what he'd felt, sitting at that kitchen table, the shape of it, the specific cold weight of understanding that someone had decided his life's work was an inconvenience to be removed. He thought about how it was possible to go from that morning to this evening and find, at the end of it, that the thing you'd built was still standing, because it was protected by anything abstract. Because the universe had an opinion about fairness. Because he'd done the next right thing, and then the next one after that. And because Audrey had done her job, and Vance had done his job, and Bennett Shaw had staged 8 trucks on a county road shoulder, because word gets around in this business, and he had kids too. Because it had taken more than one person to hold this together. And Cole was clear-eyed enough to know that, and honest enough to not pretend otherwise. He was not a man who arrived at easy conclusions about what things meant. He didn't wrap experiences in tidy lessons and store them somewhere accessible. Life was more uneven than that, and the people who claimed otherwise were either lucky or not paying attention. But there was something he'd come to understand over the months since that morning that felt true in the particular way that things feel true when you've tested them against real conditions, and they've held. What Vivienne Sterling had never been able to price was not the land itself. She'd known what the land was worth probably better than Cole did, from a pure market standpoint. What she couldn't price was what the land was for. The function of it. The life that ran on it. The 8-year-old who did homework on the workshop steps and drew the yard in a sketchbook and noticed that the roof pitch on the development next door was wrong for this region. You could buy property. You could not buy the reason someone needed to keep it. She'd tried to reduce the whole thing to a transaction, and it had never been a transaction. It had been a life, and lives, it turned out, were significantly harder to acquire than the people who dealt in them tended to assume. Cole pushed the gate closed. The latch engaged the same metallic click it always made, solid and specific, the sound of a boundary being maintained. He stood with his hand on the iron for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the warmth still in the metal from the day's sun, even as the evening cooled around it. He took his hand away and walked back across his yard, past the trucks in their rows, past the open bay door where Ray's radio was still going, toward the house where the lights were on, and Sophie was inside doing whatever she was doing with the uncomplicated certainty of a child whose foundation had not moved. The yard behind him was exactly what it had always been. His